NOMZ, why do you hate Captain Marvel? Because it's a riding abortion and a feminist wet dream. NOMZ, why do you hate Black Widow? Because it's a horrible mess and it was a disappointing send-off for a beloved character. NOMZ, why do you hate Spider-Man No Way Home? It's got lovable moments, but I hate it because it's an overrated nostalgia bait writing trash fire designed to exploit fans and take their money, and it's also an admission of guilt on the MCU's behalf that they couldn't make Tom Holland's Spider-Man interesting on his own, nor could they make him a halfway decent villain to fight, so they just stole every fan service character and villain they could from other movies and chucked it into theirs. NOMZ, do you hate everything? I don't, is the answer. There's an entire channel dedicated to that, but that's not me. And what this video is about is discussing with you guys things I've recently discovered that I've come to adore. Yes, I know this is kind of out of left field, but lately, because a lot of what I've been doing is critiquing, well, garbage, quite frankly, I've been getting more and more people saying I just hate things for the sake of hating them, or for views, or whatever. The views argument is actually quite stupid. Trust me, it's way easier and far more profitable for that matter, to have a channel that's all smiles and sunshine about everything instead of being brutally honest. Back in 2020, I lost like 800 subscribers because I said that The Mandalorian sucked, which it does, by the way. But like, do you guys have any idea how much easier it would have been for me to just disregard my principles and just ride the wave and be like, Mandalorian is the best thing Disney has put out and it saved the franchise and Star Wars is the best it's been in years, blah blah blah. Because it sure as shit would have saved me a fucking headache. But that's not why I do this. And I've always said that you can have any take you want about a movie or a piece of media as long as you're being genuinely honest and can back it up with facts and research. I hate contrarians because they try to have the hot take that everyone is chasing, but nobody buys it because it doesn't come from a genuine place. When it comes to honesty and opinions, research is paramount because if one is being honest, the research and the facts should dictate their opinion because they are well informed. I can, to some extent, forgive ignorance if someone is just mouthing off on something they don't really have much insight about, but what honestly pisses me off most of all is when people spout their controversial takes whilst blatantly ignoring the facts. That's not me on whatever I'm discussing, and I always try to let the facts shape my opinion, which is why you don't see me cover every new release or hot topic that comes out, because for the most part I'm simply not interested in them, and I basically have to force myself to watch something I will likely not like. For example, the reason I doubt I'll ever make a video on Dune is because, well, for one, I haven't read the book, and I doubt I'll ever have time to. But if I ever decide to do a Dune video, having not read the book, I'll specify in the contents of the video that what I'm saying is strictly based on the movie alone. But at the same time, I've never exactly been a hardcore or long-time Dune fan, so I doubt my take, whether I choose to talk about it or not, will have the best insight on the matter. And that's the same with a lot of hot topics that come out. Sorry for the tangent, but I just wanted you guys to understand why it is I do what I do on this channel. It's never to hate or love media in a contrived or controversial way. My intent is always to be honest and informed, but I think the majority of you already knew that. And I know my channel has been very negative recently, and I am working to change that, and rather than compromise myself by altering my takes for the sake of mass appeal like some do, I'd rather simply change the topics I talk about. I can't help that the majority of everything new is shit, okay? Unfortunately, that's just the world we live in at the moment. But since everyone else decided to make a video on last year, I figured I may as well too. And maybe for once, and hopefully going forward, I can start to put something positive out there for a change. But it's not going to be your typical best and worst of 2021. No. In fact, this is going to be much more interesting than that. This list is going to talk about pieces of media that I discovered in 2021, but they could pertain to any other year of release. So you may think you know what's going to be on this list, but I doubt you will, though I did leave some not so subtle hints in the thumbnail. But I guarantee you'll have a few surprises on here, which, yeah, I know, spoilers, kinda, but, well, that's just the way it goes, I guess. So yeah, this is going to be 8 things I discovered in 2021 that I highly recommend you guys check out. This won't be a review of all these topics, but basically just a short blurb about why I enjoyed them, and what they have to offer you, flaws and all. Because these movies, games, and whatever else aren't flawless by any means, and they certainly have problems, but everything media-related has problems to various extents. And I managed to enjoy these things despite the problems they possess, and I hope you will too. Honorable mentions: Star Wars The Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Firefly, and Serenity. I wanted to put these on the list, but I actually started watching these in 2020, so they technically don't count, but to sum them up pretty good, Star Wars The Clone Wars, despite continuity issues, has excellent world building and character development and flushes out the Star Wars universe in a way many fans wanted George Lucas to do. I even made a 3-hour video on it last year, so I don't know, check that out if you want my full opinion on The Clone Wars. Star Wars Rebels has pretty big problems, not gonna lie, particularly in the later seasons, but the characters remain great. Some are excellent, in fact. If you want a show about a Jedi Master Apprentice story and a crew of rebels who gather allies and fight off the Galactic Empire and slowly grow to become a loving family in the process, then Star Wars Rebels will give you that. Also, it's a shame, but the main character is unfortunately the least interesting and fun to watch. But that's okay, because like I said, all of the surrounding characters are actually pretty good, and will keep you invested in what's happening. Buffy the Vampire Slayer has a bit of a slow start, although I personally didn't mind the first season as much as some do. It's got a lot of that 90s ridiculousness that I've come to love, and watching the series instantly felt like a time capsule of nostalgia. But yeah, first season, slow, kind of bad, really campy, but I enjoyed it. Season 2, I really liked. Season 3 and 4 were okay, but they didn't really do it for me. Not bad by any means, just okay. Season 5, however, is unquestionably the best. Season 6 is slow as shit, has the weakest villains by far, does some really weird things with the main characters that made me want to punch the screen, but strangely enough, Season 6 also has some of the best individual episodes of the series, and what I consider to be the best season finale. And the 7th and final season of Buffy was great, and an excellent way to cap off the series. Although it did end somewhat abruptly, I would have appreciated an epilogue of some kind, but oh well, you can't have everything. And that brings us to Angel, the spin-off series to Buffy that runs parallel in the same universe. Seasons 1 to 3 of Angel, on the whole, are pretty good. Season 4 can burn in hell. And Season 5, which a lot of people prize as the best season of Angel, I thought was a serviceable end, but overrated as balls, and there's 1 or 2 character deaths that I thought were kind of stupid, but Season 5 is still very enjoyable, and it was certainly worth watching. And finally, Firefly, whose only crime is that it was cancelled. We just can't have nice things, can we? But nonetheless, the series is great, and unlike The Mandalorian, is actually a good sci-fi space western. One of my favorite genres, by the way. It has great characters, portrayed by a cast of familiar faces led by Nathan Fillion, who's an OG, and it's about a group of space outlaws just trying to make their way in the galaxy. And even though the show was cancelled, Serenity was a serviceable finale to tie up the show in a way that fans could look back smiling. Alright, we're through the honorable mentions, let's get started with the actual list. Number 8, Spartacus the Series. How many of you have seen the movie 300? Okay, well, change the culture from ancient Greece to ancient Rome, and multiply the blood, sex, and slow-mo by approximately 1 billion, and voila, you have Spartacus. Yes, it's a retelling of the classic story of a slave and gladiator who single-handedly defied the Roman Empire and started a rebellion in an attempt to bring down Rome. Granted, this is a heavily romanticized version of that, and just speaking from common sense here, I doubt much of what is in this series is based on historical accuracy at all, at least pertaining to the historical events that happened, but it does get the basic beats of the story right, and plays around with the more fictional side of things. It creates a large cast of interesting characters, has some fantastic dialogue, and balls out insane action sequences. Spartacus also really captures the brutality and the free spirit of the ancient Roman culture. I'm not going to talk anymore about the story, although likely many of you have heard the tale and know how it ends, but I should probably mention how the series goes about telling it, because it is somewhat a little unorthodox. And that was largely due to production problems that arose at the end of the first season. See, the lead actor, Andy Whitfield, sadly passed away after a battle with cancer, and because of this, the production crew was scrambling to find a way to continue the show without Andy, to allow him to get treatment and hopefully get well. This is why Season 2 of Spartacus is actually a prequel to Season 1. After Andy's tragic passing, Liam McIntyre was chosen to take up the mantle as Spartacus, and the show proceeded chronologically after Season 1 in Season 3 and 4. Both Andy and Liam brought something unique to the role and carried the character of Spartacus very well. Spartacus may be excessive in its use of slow-mo and raunchiness, but it's carried by its great cast of characters, and it's a fucking entertaining watch-through to say the least. Also, fun fact, Spartacus was filmed in New Zealand of all places. Sam Raimi was also executive producer on the project, along with longtime friend and collaborator Lucy Lawless, who's the leading actress in Spartacus, and as many of you may know, she's most famous for her role as Xena Warrior Princess, where she was also the lead, which was also filmed in New Zealand, and which was also executively produced by Sam Raimi. Now, I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right? Number 7, Ash vs. Evil Dead. A series executively produced as well as written and directed by Sam Raimi, stars Lucy Lawless as the lead actress, and is filmed on location in fucking New Zealand. Yeah, it's funny, I watched these series practically back to back, and I found out that it largely had the same people involved and was filmed in the same place. Nice revelation, but back on point. Ash vs. Evil Dead, and quite honestly the entire Evil Dead franchise should be on this list, because I introduced myself to the franchise last year, but this list isn't really about franchises, it's about singular pieces of media. Sam Raimi returns to his breakout feature film franchise with the sequel series that takes place 30 years after Evil Dead 3, aka Army of Darkness, and once again stars mad lad Bruce fucking Campbell himself as Ash Williams, who returns to battle an ancient evil he thought to have vanquished long ago, along with his two friends Pablo and Kelly. Ash is still the charismatic goofball and chainsaw-wielding badass we know, and this is very much a horror-themed series, but anyone who knows Sam Raimi's taste in horror likely knows that the Evil Dead series is anything but conventional horror. This series is as much a horror show as it's also a comedy, and that's what makes it so fun to watch. I'm not really big on the horror genre, at all. I hate slashes, and I don't really get much of a thrill by seeking out scary movies to watch because I've simply never jived well with the genre. But at the same time, I love Halloween, or rather, the theme of Halloween. Stuff like zombies, ghosts, werewolves, and monsters. But I like it in the more campy sense. Campy Halloween and campy horror, if you will. And that's exactly what Ash vs. Evil Dead and Sam Raimi's brand of the horror genre is, and why it brings something so unique to the table. Ash vs. Evil Dead is a campy horror-based series that's perfect for capturing the lovable atmosphere and theme of Halloween. It also pulls no punches when it comes to content, and it shows. Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell wanted to have the freedom to do whatever they wanted with the show, no matter how grotesque or graphic for that matter. The blood and gore you can expect from horror movies is on full display in this, but it's normally portrayed in a humorous manner, and that in a nutshell is what makes the series so enjoyable. Shame it was cancelled after season 3 despite the series being well received. The Evil Dead fanbase wasn't exactly supporting the official release, unfortunately. If Sam Raimi decided to do the show on Netflix, things might have turned out better, but I'm glad that they decided to go with Star because, well, they were allowed to make the series they wanted. This series will not be for everyone. It's certainly got its own niche, but hopefully we get to see the series return at one point, and I'd still recommend checking it out. Speaking of the horror genre, number 6, Dying Light. Yeah, okay, remember when I said I wasn't a big fan of the horror genre? Well, this would be the exception. Admittedly, Dying Light is a bit limp on the narrative, and the characters for the most part aren't very memorable, and there are one or two that will annoy the shit out of you, but thankfully they die pretty quickly though. That said, you do get somewhat attached to the protagonist Kyle Crane, and while he's not the most distinguished villain, you do grow to hate the main antagonist, Rise, who is a decent, if somewhat generic bad guy, but he's the kind of villain you will want to see dead by the end of the game, so I guess mission accomplished on that front. But despite the story being just okay, the gameplay, the open world, and the atmosphere absolutely kick ass. The parkour is addicting, the survival and scavenging feels real, you aren't going to be able to loot a fuck ton of firearms and uber powerful weapons because you got to earn that shit first. The game forces you to think about the best way to proceed and to conserve your resources as much as possible, and the day-night cycle adds something very special to this brand of the zombie apocalypse video game genre. By day, it's fight off bandits and gather supplies while fighting some moderately aggressive zombies, but then at night, it turns into an absolute run for your fucking life scenario, hence the name Dying Light. And it's thrilling as shit, especially since you gain extra survival points for braving the city at night, which help you rank up and unlock new skills and weapons. But there's a risk-reward concept that goes along with it, you see. Because if you die, you lose all those survival points you gained and then some. And I really like this aspect because it reminded me of something akin to a Souls game. And yeah, like I said, the best atmosphere for a post-apocalyptic zombie horror game I've ever seen, and its highly anticipated sequel is right around the corner. So while you can, I suggest everyone check out Dying Light. Number 5, Spider-Man the 90s animated show. Wow, I cannot believe I never saw this show growing up. Granted, there's an overly ridiculous vibe to this show. It's extremely comic booky. For example, you get bad guys chasing Spider-Man with flying motorcycles and a whole bunch of ridiculous sci-fi villain stuff. But you also get cameos and special appearances from other Marvel characters like the X-Men, Nick Fury and the Avengers, and even Blade shows up. And adding to the ridiculousness of the series, you even get magical beings like Madam Web and Doctor Strange showing up as well. This series, however, despite being completely batshit ridiculous at times, embraces that with open arms. It knows what it is and where it comes from, and it's trying to be as comic booky as possible. This series is also quite special because it took place before all the licensing bullshit went down with Marvel, which is why it was able to feature so many Marvel characters in one place without the mysterious absence of certain characters that would normally show up. And this show is just the epitome of freedom with the Marvel Universe. And despite its overly ridiculous comic book nature, this series still manages to invest you in what's going on and tell great stories, and above all else is very faithful to the Spider-Man character and his origins, as well as some of the classic Spider-Man stories that were in the comics, for example, the symbiote and the transformation of Venom at the Bell Tower. Granted, it's not 100% faithful, but for an adaptation, it's great. And if you're a fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, as well as the first Mark Webb Amazing Spider-Man movie, you won't have to look far to see where they took a lot of inspiration for those movies. The 90s Spider-Man animated series is timeless, and at this point is something of a time capsule back to a period that was simpler when it came to pop culture and comic book media for that matter. I highly recommend everyone check it out. Number 4. Welcome to Demon School iruma-kun. Ah yes, my long journey racing towards weebhood, a rank my audience still has yet to grant me at this time.
How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
I went on something of an anime pursuit last year, searching for something new and fresh that I could adore. And then by sheer luck I came across Welcome to Demon School iruma-kun. Remember what I said about campy Halloween? Well, that's exactly why I've come to adore this show. You see, much like, for example, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, this show plays with horror elements and is Halloween themed, but it's for the most part endearing and played for laughs. Welcome to Demon School is a fantasy comedy series where the main protagonist Iruma is adopted by a demon, taken to the netherworld of the demons as his newly adopted grandson, and is sent to one of the most prestigious high school for demons in the land. Oh, and there's just one tiny little catch here. Demons eat humans, you see? And if Iruma's identity is blown, he will be dead. This whole show is about Iruma trying to survive his day-to-day life whilst encountering a number of interesting and lovable characters who I'm sure most of you will come to adore. This series also adopts several common tropes to tell its story. For example, there's this character called Caligo, and he is Snape. That's it. He is just Severus Snape, and everyone knows it. And the anime knows it. But the anime has this clever way of taking these common tropes it adopts and finds ways to flip them on their heads, often to great humorous effect. No spoilers, of course, you'll find this out in episode 2, and if you're worried about how much of the show you should watch before you commit to it, I'd recommend watching up until the end of episode 8, Head Over Heels for Clara, which is still my pick for the funniest episode to date. And yes, I'd recommend watching the dub, particularly for Clara's voice actor, because she sells the shit out of the role, but all of them do their job well, and I found it's far more easier to enjoy the comedy if you don't have to read it in text. But beyond the laughs, this show does have a story to tell, as well as short stories that will develop the characters in ways that will help you grow to love them, and in some cases, fear them. No spoilers once again, but there's this one character that creeped the absolute shit out of me, and this happened when the anime did what it does best and flipped what we thought this character was going to be right on its head. But you'll find out who that is if you watch the series as a whole. It recently wrapped up its second season, and I can't wait for the third to come out. Check out Welcome to Demon School iruma-kun. Number 3, Halo Infinite. Alright, yes, I know I'm kind of cheating with this one, but when I said things I've discovered, like I mentioned before, I wasn't talking about franchises, but pieces of media pertaining to that franchise. I have problems with Halo Infinite. Yes, a lot of corporatization pertaining to the game, as well as the somewhat lacking in substance story that was told, that honestly felt like it was missing most of its third act, but all gripes aside, Halo Infinite was fucking amazing. It's the best Halo has ever looked, hands down, from both a graphical standpoint and its art direction. The music, while certainly missing the voice of Marty O'Donnell, certainly took heavy inspiration from the man, and 343 hired an absolute genius team to helm the musical composition. Gareth Coco in particular, who did the unbelievable soundtrack to Ori and the Blind Forest and Will of the Wisps, two games you should also check out, by the way. But in addition to the superficial, Halo Infinite's gameplay is absolutely superb, providing an excellent hybrid to the classic games with its modern sequels, and taking all of the excellent fan feedback from the Halo community and blotting out the nonsense. 343 created a gameplay loop as well as a multiplayer that, while being beloved by most everyone, also still feels like Halo. At least certainly way more than Halo 5 did. Personally, Halo 4 still felt like Halo to me. The only thing about Halo 4 that didn't was the lack of fair starts that weren't brought into the game until a later update. But that said, the only thing that did feel like Halo in Halo 5 was the fair starts. Sorry, I know that's a bit of a tangent, but I just had to get that off my chest. Halo Infinite, in addition to the great gameplay, has one of the most breathtaking open worlds we could have wished for. Every Halo fan who played Combat Evolved's second mission walked out onto that Halo ring for the first time and wanted to explore the whole damn thing. Their wet dream has come true with Halo Infinite. You can explore just about anywhere, and the map is gigantic and full of unique landmarks and structures and things to explore and things to find and little secret Easter eggs hidden amongst the giant open world. Though I will say the open world could have been a tad bit denser with wildlife, and also it could have had somewhat more interesting and dynamic biomes like Arctic and desert environments, but I'm fine with 343 saving that for a later campaign DLC perhaps. As for the story, without spoilers of course, I'll say this much. It's not the story 343 told that bothers me, it's what 343 decided to leave out of the story. I actually think time skipping ahead and telling the Halo 5 fallout through the eyes of a character that was for the majority of the campaign oblivious to what happened was a very good decision, because we got most of the information we needed, but we didn't have to play through that, which is great. Personally, I for one didn't want to play through a game about Cortana being Skynet, and I know I'm not alone in saying that. Instead, the story we get is far more simple. Stop the Banished from firing the Halo ring, rally survivors and rebuild the UNSC foothold on Zeta Halo, and discover what happened to Cortana. Master Chief is perhaps the best he has ever been, and his relationship with an AI known as the Weapon is the heart and soul of the story. Escharum was a villain who wasn't bad, but admittedly could have been much better, and whose biggest crime, sadly enough, was that he simply wasn't Atriox, who should have been the villain. And lastly, the Harbinger, unfortunately, was just a far less threatening and less interesting didact. The Achilles heel of Halo Infinite, unlike Halo 4, where we actually find out what the didact was up to, and why we need to stop him. By the end of Halo Infinite's campaign, we still have no idea what was going on with the Harbinger and what she was doing, which sadly, to wrap up the campaign, was a huge kick to the balls. I understand that Halo Infinite was laying the foundation with this campaign to set up later DLC installments to tell the rest of the story, and I'm not mad with a cliffhanger. I think the game certainly earned a cliffhanger, but this feels like the campaign ended with half of its third act missing, or perhaps it could have just used a better epilogue. That doesn't mean the ending's trash by any means, it just means that it fell somewhat short of the mark. Regardless, despite that small downer on the campaign, Halo Infinite exceeded in two key areas. The first being that it course-corrected from Halo 5 tremendously, and resolved certain damaging plot points in a manner that allows the franchise to move forward, finally, and on a new and interesting premise. And two, Halo Infinite reinvested me in both the story and characters going forward. It's not perfect, not by a long shot, but it was damn good, and I'd highly suggest checking out Halo Infinite. Just temper your expectations a bit. Also, if you want more on Halo Infinite, check out my gaming channel, NOMZ. There's already a bunch of videos up on there, and that's where I talk about most of my gaming stuff anyway. For now, let's get back onto the list. Number 2, Marvel's Daredevil. I finally got around to watching this, and I'm sure this is the one many of you were waiting for me to talk about. Daredevil was really close to being number 1 on this list. This series is fucking amazing. And despite being loosely tied to the MCU, Daredevil just made me hate what the MCU has become even more because of how fucking shit it is by comparison, especially in 2022. This series, on the other hand, is so good I struggle to believe it's real. Season 1, incredible. Season 2, is still great, but is undoubtedly Daredevil's low point. The episodes with the Punisher that Drew Goddard was in charge of was some of the best in the series, but the instant Elektra shows up, spoilers I know, but you really need to hear this because it's important. The second Elektra shows up, the season goes on an agonizing downward fucking spiral. At least for the most part. But that's only because Drew Goddard wasn't able to do his thing. And woke darling Lauren, the death of all good writing and talent, Hissrich, came aboard and basically had to include all of her bullshit to completely derail season 2 so that Daredevil would fall in line with Marvel's The Defenders project, Lauren's sad, fucking terrible, desperate attempt at replicating the Avengers. And you want to talk about standing on the shoulders of giants? Most people think of Kathleen Kennedy. Lauren Hissrich is the Kathleen Kennedy of Netflix. She gets tossed aboard excellent projects and makes them subpar with a terribly sincere lack of talent. She's the one who's currently fucking up the Witcher series at the moment. The only reason the Witcher series isn't complete shit is because of the source material, which Hissrich had nothing to do with, as many of you know, and source material of which Hissrich is now deviating from that's fucking up the whole series. And more to the point, the only reason why Defenders wasn't complete garbage, despite the fact that it should have been a sure thing, is because of Daredevil and because Drew Goddard was also on the project. And this was proven when Daredevil returned in season 3 with Lauren Hissrich nowhere to be fucking found and Drew Goddard was once again allowed to do his thing. And season 3, what I consider to be Daredevil's best season. Charlie Cox was fantastic as both Matt Murdock and Daredevil. Motherfucker absolutely owned the role. Vincent D'Onofrio was an excellent choice as the Kingpin, who's twice the villain in season 3 that he was in season 1. The supporting cast was all great. Karen was somewhat annoying at times, but mostly good. And John Bernthal as Frank Castle, the Punisher, was incredible. On top of having some of the best writing in a Marvel product to date, particularly the rooftop conversation between Daredevil and the Punisher, the action is some of the best you'll see anywhere, not just in a Marvel project. I mean anywhere you look for action, you'll see some of the best in Daredevil. Everyone who's seen Daredevil knows exactly what I'm talking about here. There's that one episode in every season that will make the audience member go, wow, did that just fucking happen? And these moments won't be telegraphed. They will just show up unannounced and leave you speechless. Daredevil is probably the best grounded superhero origin story told since Batman Begins, but unlike the much beloved Dark Knight trilogy, flaws and all, Daredevil actually sticks the landing, even though it was cancelled. Season 3, aside from the last 30 seconds being embarrassingly bad, was the perfect conclusion to the series, and managed to tie up most, if not all, loose ends, or rather, every loose end that needed to be tied up, and the series ended on a high. I see the Daredevil fanbase clambering for a return of the character, but in the hands of the MCU, and the talent and creative vacuum known as Kevin Feige, who's the male Kathleen Kennedy equivalent, talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. But yeah, in the hands of Kevin Feige, if the Hawkeye show is anything to go by, I hope we never see a Daredevil return, because chances are the talentless, jealous hacks at the MCU, who did everything they could to ignore Daredevil before, until their well started drying up and they started scraping the bottom of the barrel, chances are those cunts will just likely use Daredevil to just propel another terrible MCU character that by comparison nobody will give a shit about, and they won't treat the character with respect. It was cool seeing Charlie Cox cameo as Matt Murdock in Spider-Man No Way Home, but beyond that, I'd rather they just leave him be. Or at the very least, get Drew Goddard to come back. Whatever happens, we have 3 mostly great seasons of Daredevil that everyone can and should watch. Go check it out. And number 1 on this list, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's listened to the podcast in the past year, number 1 on this list is Fairy Tail. Yep, it's Fairy Tail, a 328 episode anime that I came across randomly and became addicted to. I binged this show like crazy and became lost in Hiro Mashima's world of magic and wonder. I have binged and re-binged this show several times now. I know it inside and out, and it's without a doubt what's left the biggest impact on me over the past year, which is why it's number 1 at the top of this list. Fairy Tail is quite simple, really. The land of Fiore is a land filled with magic. Everyone uses magic, but there are those who master it as an art. These are the wizards of the land, and the wizards band into guilds to get requests for jobs, and wizards complete these jobs, and that's how they make their living. Fairy Tail is the most notorious guild in the land, and is also the most unique. The members of Fairy Tail aren't your conventional wizards. In fact, they're looked down upon as a bunch of overly destructive weirdos who do more harm than good. But in actuality, that's largely true, because the majority of Fairy Tail members are those who found a home when prior to the guild they had none. They're the outcasts of society who each have interesting and sometimes tragic backstories, and they don't belong anywhere else but Fairy Tail. The first season of Fairy Tail is superb. It tells a bunch of short stories and arcs, and it lays the groundwork for what the show would become. From season 2 onward, every season is dedicated to a singular arc that develops the story and characters, with of course the exception of various filler episodes and smaller arcs sprinkled throughout. Season 2 is Nirvana, Season 3 is Edalus, Season 4 is Tenra Island, Season 5 is The Infinity Clock, Season 6 is Grand Magic Games. The exception would probably be Season 7, because it's an extremely long season, close to about 100 episodes in fact, and there's multiple arcs in there, including 2 of my personal favorites, the Eclipse and Tartaros arcs, which most people agree is the best. After which you have Fairy Tail Zero, a necessary prequel arc that sheds some backstory on the Fairy Tail Guild and answers some very necessary questions that feed nicely into the final season where everything comes together. The basic gist of Fairy Tail is it follows a small group of protagonists, Natsu, Lucy, Grey, Urza, and Happy, as they go on various adventures around the land of Fiore, ranging from simple wizarding jobs to saving the world. Fairy Tail is simple, but at the same time has some of the best world building, lore, and dynamic range of characters that I've seen in anything. Is it flawless? Fuck no. And there are things about Fairy Tail that will likely get on everyone's nerves from time to time. I can't exactly tell you what those things are, because that will be heading into spoiler territory. To sum it up, Fairy Tail's biggest problem is that it often fails to pull the trigger. I'll just leave it at that. But when we talk about pros and cons, Fairy Tail's pros don't just outweigh the cons, they fucking obliterate them. And in addition to the characters being incredible, the lore being great, and the action, while not as good as, say, Dragon Ball Z, for instance, is still fucking excellent. Also, Fairy Tail is one of the most endearingly funny shows I've watched in recent memory. God damn, does this anime have some fucking hilarious moments. And that's all heightened tremendously by the dub. Yes, I know dub isn't for everyone, but I'm very much always a dub watcher when it comes to anime. So that being said, Fairy Tail's dub is one of the best out there, second only to DBZ, and even that's debatable. Which is extremely high praise coming from me, since the dub of Dragon Ball Z is like my favorite thing of all time. But it only makes sense since much of those same voice actors make up the cast of Fairy Tail. Except it's a lot of the background voice actors in Dragon Ball Z that comprise the lead roles of Fairy Tail, and vice versa. And that being said, both Todd Haberkorn and Jeremy Lee did an absolutely outstanding job with their roles as Natsu and Lucy.
Good morning.
Don't play cool! What are you doing in my room in my bed with your cat?
Loyal subjects, shut up and listen!
All the money in the world can't buy you happiness. I figured that out when I was a child. Finally, I'm truly happy. And I'm not gonna let you ruin it for me, you hear?
Now, my loyal servants of Lord Dragneel! Don't stop destroying stuff!
Keep going with this servant crap, and I'm coming up there first.
Just do what I tell you to, slave!
I recommend everyone watch Fairy Tail because I have a feeling that most people at some point in their lives have felt like they could use a fairy tale of their own. That sense of belonging that everyone needs, to be accepted for who you are, and I think that's what Hiro Mashima's awesome writing was trying to convey first and foremost in this long and beautiful story he decided to tell. He wanted to make you feel like these weren't just characters that you were following on their journey. Fairy Tail is your guild as well. And honestly, it goes to show because the Fairy Tail fanbase, as far as I've seen, is one of the most wholesome out there. Sure, Fairy Tail has its haters, but I could care less about them. I'm talking about people who genuinely enjoy the show and the manga. There's very little division and toxicity among them as far as I've seen, and I'm very happy to be one of them. I know that sounds corny as shit, but hey, it's the truth, and I started this video with a giant tangent about the truth, so why would I stop now? And if there's one thing I've discovered in the past year that I think everyone should check out above all the rest, it's Fairy Tail. Anyway guys, that's everything I wanted to talk about and recommend to you in this video. Some awesome stuff I found last year that I'm sure the majority of you will enjoy. Hope you check out that stuff, and let me know some of the stuff you've discovered in the past year. Maybe recommend it to me, something in the comments that you like. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. Just quickly, I wanted to give a huge shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members for all their contributions to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel, the Patreon link is in the description, or you could just hit the join button. Feel free to check out the channel's Discord server if you want to chat to the community about Marvel and other things as well. Feel free to check out the rest of my channel and secondary channels as well. A big shout out and thank you to A British Potato for helping with the audio editing of this video. I've linked his channel below. Feel free to check him out. He makes good stuff. And finally, here's one last thank you for staying till the end of the video. You are a legend, and I'll see you next time.